Above a pretty pub in Nottingham, 20-year-old Matthew Pyke and his 21-year-old girlfriend Joanna created their first home together.
It was obvious that they really loved each other deeply, and she was so good for him.
As well as studying at Nottingham Trent University, the couple ran a website forum for fans of a computer war game.
The people got to know each other very, very well on there, although they probably never physically met each other.
But Matthew and Joanna had no idea that the website forum would open their lives to an evil stranger.
I didn't know any of the problems they were having. I wish Matthew could have, sort of confided in me and said, look, I am having a problem.
A stranger who would tear their lives apart.
This developed into one of the most extreme cases of stalking I've ever witnessed.
Because what began as stalking was to end in a gruesome murder.
Nobody should die that way.
I've never seen anything that horrific.
One of the duties of a pathologist is to determine the cause of death.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required. Download Veely now.
Stow Market, a small, picturesque town in Suffolk. This is where Kim and William Pyke decided to settle down and raise their two sons, Matthew and Adam.
Matthew was an easy child. He's sort of laid back and happy, always smiling.
Matthew Pyke was born on the 23rd of August 1988 and was the baby of the Pyke family.
Matthew was quite shy and reserved, but he had a really wicked sense of humour. You didn't have to amuse him, he'd amuse himself. And he'd spend loads of time on the computer.
Matthew's passion for computers and playing computer games began at an early age.
We've always had some kind of computer or games console in this house. I was looking at a family video the other day, and Matthew was about 4 or 5, and he was playing on my mum and dad's really old computer, even at that age.
Matthew is very talented with computers, without a shadow of a doubt. He invented his own little programs, his own little games here and there, stuff he'd put on the internet.
By the time he was in his late teens, there was one game in particular Matthew loved to play, a war game based in a fantasy world where players used cunning and tactical strategies to defeat an enemy army.
Advanced Wars really was, from what Matthew had told us, was sort of like a more technical game of chess, basically. You'd have your army and you'd set out your pieces, just like a chess game, really. And you'd sort of battle other people from around the world on the internet and sort of build up your army as you went along, really.
Matthew shared tips about playing his favourite game with other players on the internet, including a 17-year-old girl called Joanna from Selby in Yorkshire. The pair hit it off.
I think he was a bit embarrassed that he'd met her online and wanted to meet her face to face. So when he went up to York to meet her, he didn't actually tell us that that was what he was doing. He told us that he was meeting a friend, and we assumed it was male, and that they were going to a concert in York.
Romance blossomed, and it was soon time for the couple to meet each other's parents.
I thought she was lovely. She's stunning to look at, and she was into computing, which was, as far as Matthew was concerned, a bonus. We hadn't been prepared for the fact that they would become a couple so quickly and be so happy together, but it was obvious that they really loved each other deeply, and she was so good for him.
Joanna did wonders for Matthew's confidence, and when university beckoned, they decided to head to the same city so they could be together. Matthew and Joanna chose Nottingham Trent University. After a year, the couple moved in together and continued to share their passion for computers. With an online friend called James, they set up a website forum called Wars Central, where fans of their favourite tactical war game could share tips.
There were a hardcore of individuals, probably 50 or so, that were regularly on the site.
The website forum became central to the lives of this group of young computer gamers, and their online chats were not limited to advanced wars.
Some of these people were online all day, every day. They lived their lives through it. It seemed they talked about everything from relationships to families, holidays, politics, their studies. Nothing appeared to be off limits.
The forum members felt they knew one another, but the reality was they were putting their trust in strangers, most of whom they knew nothing about and had never met in person.
People need to think, when you make friends online, just who you are inviting into your life.
The website members had usernames to give them some level of anonymity. Matthew was called Shade and Joanna went by Jojo. But as a young woman who was passionately interested in tactical war games, Joanna stood out in the forum.
It appeared to be quite a male world, but Joanna was definitely the matriarch. She was up there. She was the leading lady.
And Joanna quickly attracted the attention of a forum member whose username was Eagle the Lightning.
Matthew, Joanna and most of the forum members knew very, very little about Eagle the Lightning. They knew he was German and his first name was David. They didn't know any more than that.
David told Joanna that his parents had both abandoned him when he was just 10 years old and that he now lived with his elderly grandmother.
Joanna herself was particularly compassionate towards him and entered into sort of private conversations with him to try and bolster his confidence.
But Eagle the Lightning quickly wanted much more than Joanna's friendship and compassion.
David truly believed that one day Joanna would be his girlfriend and they'd end up together.
Eagle the Lightning knew Joanna was Matthew's girlfriend, but that did not deter him. And the more he found out about Joanna on the internet, the more obsessed he became.
He said that he liked her, and he'd liked her for a long time, but that when he saw her picture on Facebook, he decided that he was in love with her.
David had a real thing for redheads. He considered them to be superior, more intelligent, and Joanna was David's perfect woman.
David told Joanna about his growing feelings for her, and she immediately tried to end his infatuation.
She told him that she was deeply in love with Matthew and she had no interest in anybody else.
But David refused to take no for an answer. He loved Joanna and he was determined she would love him back. Without warning, on the 3rd of May 2008, a document appeared on the forum from Eagle the Lightning. He had posted a love letter to Joanna for all the members to see.
It was 2 pages of A4 declaring that she was the first thing he thought of when he woke up in the morning and the last thing he thought of when he went to sleep at night, and how she'd changed his world.
The declaration also said David loved Joanna more than anything else in his life, even though he'd never met her in person. Eagle the Lightning had become completely obsessed with Joanna, and there was nothing she could say or do to stop him. In May 2008, students 20-year-old Matthew Pyke and 21-year-old Joanna were living together in Nottingham. Both had part-time jobs.
They liked quiet things. They weren't a pair for going out to the pub and getting drunk or anything like that. They would go for walks. They were just happy in each other's company.
From their flat, they had set up and ran a website forum called Wars Central, but one of its members, 21-year-old David, known online as Eagle the Lightning, had become completely infatuated with Joanna.
He would ask things such as, "Where is Matt? Is Matt with you?" And it was those sort of things that she found not appropriate. So she would very quickly try to cut that off. This isn't the time for us to talk about anything to do with you and me. There is no you and me. Just focus on what we are here to do, which is talk about the games.
The young couple had no idea Eagle the Lightning was painstakingly finding out information about where they lived.
What he did was ask various people about Joe and Matt. So, for example, whereabouts in Nottingham do they live? What sort of street is it? So, over a period of time, he began to pen a picture of where it was that they lived.
He knew it was above a pub. He also knew there was a park nearby, and he was a user of Google Earth. It wouldn't have been difficult for him to locate that flat. But I think the final clincher was when he led to one of the other users to believe that he knew so much about the location of the flat that the other user actually confirmed the address.
Through his detailed research on the internet, Eagle the Lightning also knew the couple had gone on holiday to Devon with Joanna's parents. He decided to plan a surprise for them on their return home to Nottingham.
They received text messages while they were away that suggested David was going to be coming to Nottingham. And James actually gives them what he refers to as a heads up that Eagle the Lightning was intending to travel.
Hey Joe, ETL is coming to...
But Matthew and Joanna thought it was a joke. Surely a stranger wouldn't travel hundreds of miles to another country uninvited just because he had a bizarre crush. Especially a stranger who had no idea where they lived. On the 21st of June 2008, the young couple arrived back home in Nottingham.
They're approached by an individual. They didn't know him, and this individual says to them, "Hello, I'm Eagle the Lightning from Germany."
The forum user turned stalker had arrived unannounced and uninvited outside the couple's home.
When Matthew and Joanna first met David, they were very polite towards him. They felt a little bit embarrassed about the situation, but they were typically British about it and offered him some hospitality to make him not feel so unwanted.
Matthew and Joanna found out Eagle the Lightning's name was David Heist, that he spoke perfect English and that he didn't intend to fly home to Germany for a month.
She was upset about it, but Matthew felt sorry for Heist. It was him that suggested that, you know, he's come all this way, let's be friendly towards him, and convinced Joe that I should be invited into their flat.
But it appeared David Heist expected more than hospitality. The virtual stranger expected to stay with them. But Joanna was determined to get him out of their flat as soon as she could.
Have you got any rooms to offer tonight, please?
Joanna called 20 hotels and hostels.
Oh, really? Not at all.
But there were no rooms available in Nottingham for that night.
Right, OK, thanks anyway.
The uninvited visitor had to stay with them or sleep on the streets.
There was a conversation that her and Matt had about where they could send Heist, and it was Matt that suggested that for one night only, they allow Heist to stay.
But the size of the couple's studio flat meant their unwelcome guest had to sleep right next to their bed. Joanna was deeply uncomfortable with the situation.
She barely slept that night. She recalls waking up and looking, and Heist was awake and staring at her. So that spooked her as well.
David Heist watched her all night long. Joanna ensured David did not stay a second night. She found him a hotel room.
Hi, is it possible to book a room, please, for tonight? Oh, you have?
The couple were determined to do whatever they could to stop David Heist staying in Nottingham for a whole month.
Already at that point, they were sending messages to other gamers about Heist and the fact that they thought he was somewhat unusual and that they were trying to work out what to do with him.
Well, we've just been away, we've just gone back.
Heist's intentions during his time in Nottingham were clearly to spend as much time with Joanna as he could, even to the point that he would ask Joanna in front of Matt if there was any chance of him spending any time with her, with Matt not being present.
David could see his behaviour was unnerving Joanna and tried to justify his actions.
During the time that Heist stayed in Nottingham, he wrote letters to try and convince Joanna that he wasn't weird and to try and justify the reasons for his behaviour and to tell her about the fact that he'd been discarded by his parents.
Joanna became more and more uncomfortable, but after a week they were able to send David Heist on his way without offending him.
Between them and the gamers, they came up with a plan to keep Heist away from them. They suggested that he travel around the country to go and visit some of the other gamers.
David Heist had finally left Nottingham, and Matthew and Joanna were able to put the strange incident with the German forum member behind them. No one outside the forum, not even Matthew's nearest and dearest, had any knowledge of the bizarre encounter.
He seemed happy. There was no inkling that anything was wrong or upsetting him. He just seemed a normal Matthew. He would be difficult to get information out of on the phone. We would have to question him. Just the normal mum things. Are you all right? Are you eating? You know, are you looking after yourself? Are you washing clothes? That kind of thing.
Matthew believed he had looked after himself and Joanna by moving their uninvited visitor on, but little did they know that after meeting Joanna, David Heist had become even more obsessed.
The thoughts that dominated his mind at that time were all about Joanna and him being with her.
The more forum members who met David Heist in person, the more his behaviour became a topic of conversation.
People having met him now think there's something really quite not right. They all found him a bit unusual. None of them liked the idea that he clearly was becoming besotted by Joanne.
Nothing anybody would say to David would have got him to change his mind about his feelings towards Joanna.
And David Heist quickly learned that his fascination with Joanna and eagerness to discuss her online was a hot topic on the forum. He was being described as strange.
David didn't really like people discussing him over the internet, and this made him angry.
Heist is already beginning to develop the feeling that they are ostracising him from the group.
But Eagle the Lightning wasn't the only forum member who was becoming angry about the situation. Matthew was becoming increasingly frustrated about David's obsession with his girlfriend.
On the 22nd of July, Matthew generates a document. It's a document referred to as the 19 Reasons. And the 19 Reasons is a list of things that he puts together that indicates why he hates Eagle the Lightning.
I hate the way you meddle, the way you never let something rest. I hate you because you tracked us down and intruded on our lives. I hate you because no matter how many times we invited you in, you barely said a damn word. I hate the way you endlessly pulled Joe, when I can see how annoyed she gets. I hate you forever laying eyes on the woman I have dedicated my life to.
The 19 Reasons reveals in no uncertain terms exactly how Matthew felt about David Heist, his infatuation with his girlfriend Joanna, and his unwelcome visit to the UK. Eagle the Lightning had blatantly laid his cards on the table in terms of his feelings for Joanna, and in return, Matthew Pyke followed suit. But he only emailed his attack on Heist to a few friends on the forum, not to everyone.
It took a lot to upset Matthew or to get him angry. He'll take so much and stay calm, and then he would explode, but it was very, very rare. He hated confrontation, he hated arguing.
But David Heist soon learnt of the 19 Reasons document and was furious.
His reaction to that is clearly very, very angry.
And he could not understand why the website forum was siding with Matthew.
Most of the forum members believed David's behaviour towards Joanna was unacceptable. However, David believed he was right and his behaviour was proper.
He would start to prolifically defend his corner, and he would then become increasingly aggressive. He wouldn't leave a conversation, just leave and walk away. He was like a dog with a rag. He wouldn't let go. People had to block him in order to get rid of him.
Even after the forum members blocked him, he still thought he was doing nothing wrong.
David's behaviour resulted in him being banned from the website forum, and because his whole life was online, the repercussions were devastating.
To be blocked out of a conversation where everybody else was involved would lead to enormous paranoia. Horrendous. It's like all your friends refusing to answer the phone to you. It could be seen regularly, individuals saying, please, please let me back in, begging to come online, and all the rest of the users chuckling and refusing to let them back in. It was really quite something quite damaging.
And David Heist believed there was just one person to blame for his exclusion from the website forum.
Heist thought that it was now Matthew that was generating the problem between them, and clearly he was trying to reflect that with other gamers. The response from them was, you know, just forget it, you know, just leave it all alone. But we also know that he began to indicate that was something that was making him so angry that he'd got to come back to confront Matthew about it.
On the 31st of July 2008, less than 2 weeks after his first trip to the UK, David Heist borrowed his uncle's car and began the long drive from Germany to Nottingham, determined to settle the score with Matthew and prove to Joanna that she should be with him.
At this point, David was totally obsessed with Joanna and was stalking her.
Without taking any breaks to rest, Heist drove relentlessly for hour after hour.
He is intent on travelling all the way to Nottingham, that's evident. About 2:30 in the morning, Heist's car leaves the road at high speed and goes into a ditch.
David Heist's absolute obsession had delivered him to the brink of destruction. In the early hours of the 1st of August 2008, David Heist had lost control of his car during a non-stop journey from Germany to Nottingham and crashed. It was a miracle he survived.
As the car that David was driving was a left-hand drive, when it left the road, had it been a right-hand drive, his injuries would have been a lot more serious, perhaps fatal.
Heist was rescued by the British Emergency Services and was open with them about the reason for his mammoth journey.
The police officers we spoke to that attended the scene told us of a man who was there alone in his car, having come to UK to visit his girlfriend in Nottingham. They hadn't been going out very long. However, he did speak to her quite a lot over the internet.
Heist was telling the police about Joanna, who did live in Nottingham but was not his girlfriend. He had developed an online infatuation with her that within a matter of weeks had become altogether more sinister, and even a near-death experience would not deter him.
David was obsessed with Joanna and he was stalking her, and there's no other word to describe it other than he stalked her.
Joanna was scared but took comfort from the fact that she believed Heist was at home in Germany. But he wasn't.
Jo arrived home from work, and as she approaches her address, she sees Heist waiting for her.
Heist's intense fixation with Joanna had begun to seriously trouble the couple, but they never revealed their concerns to anyone outside the forum, not even to their families.
Matthew kept most things quite close to himself. If he had a problem, he didn't like to burden other people with it. So we were always quite late in finding out if there was a problem.
Matthew and Joanna believed they could cope with the situation.
Living away from home for the first time, they thought that they were now adults and they could sort of deal with things on their own. You know, if he'd have come to me and said, I'm having a problem, you know, I would have been there in a heartbeat.
Matthew and Joanna desperately began to think of a way to get Heist to leave Nottingham again, but it became increasingly clear he would not go back to Germany until he saw the object of his obsession.
She knows that Heist is only here to see her and is just pursuing her. This has slowly but surely dawned on her that he's become completely obsessed by her. and that obviously scares her a lot.
David wanted Joanna, and he thought that Joanna would come round to his way of thinking eventually.
As a last resort, Joanna and Matthew agreed to meet David Heist at the Arboretum Park in Nottingham. They were determined to end Heist's obsession with Joanna once and for all.
The conversation in the Arboretum is really quite dramatic between the group.
Joanna couldn't have been any clearer with a message to David.
Just stay out of my life! You're just ruining it!
Joanna told Heist there was no chance she would ever be with him. She loved Matthew and he must stop harassing them. Hearing the rejection face to face from Joanna crushed David Heist.
Heist is so upset, is sobbing and can be barely understood by Joe.
The situation was clearly getting out of hand, and in a moment of calm, Joanna and David Heist agreed, quite adultly, to have a ceasefire and not to contact each other for a set amount of time.
As Matthew and Joanna left the park that day, they believed that would be the last time they ever saw David Heist and that their online troubles were over. Heist returned to Germany on the 2nd of August 2008, but his fixation with Joanna continued.
David didn't want to move on and couldn't let himself move on.
Despite the promises he'd made in the park, once back in Germany, Heist's obsession reached a new level of intensity. On the 16th of September 2008, he and Joanna talked online.
He makes reference to suicide and doing away with his life, which is no longer worthwhile if Joanna doesn't want to be in it. And he discusses the possibility of turning up in Nottingham and committing suicide in front of Joanna.
Distraught, Joanna permanently blocked David Heist. But although he could not contact her online, he decided to find another way to get in touch.
Can I speak to Joe, please?
He telephoned her at home.
No, you can't! Can't you just leave us alone?
A blazing row ensued, after which Matthew and Joanna were both described as being hysterical, and certainly the chat log conversations, Joanna makes reference to Heist needing to see a psychiatrist.
Matthew and Joanna told David Heist if he ever returned to Nottingham, they would call the police. They also checked online to find out if Heist's stalking was breaking the law. But on the evening of the 18th of September 2008, they put their worries aside because they'd been together for exactly 3 years.
Matt and Joe went out to celebrate their anniversary. But it's fair to say that at that time, they weren't feeling great because of everything that had been happening. So it was a very, very low-key evening, and they were back home in their flat by about 9:30.
The next day, Joanna got up to go to work, just like any other morning.
She went to go to work. The last thing she did was she woke Matthew up, she kissed him, she told him that she loved him, and then she left.
Bye. See you.
When Joanna went out to work that morning, she had no idea she was being watched.
Joanna and Matthew would usually exchange texts throughout the day.
Joanna had tried to contact Matthew repeatedly during that day, and as she had no replies, she started to get seriously concerned.
By the time she left work, Joanna was worried about Matthew.
She runs back home. Upon entering into the communal hallway, Jo sees what she thinks is a small smear of blood. Jo is now hyperventilating. She runs to the door of her own flat and been met by an horrendous scene.
It's absolutely the worst nightmare that you can ever imagine opening your front door onto.
The flat had been ransacked. There was property all over the floor, paperwork, clothing, footwear, and at that point, the only thought that she had was that somebody had been into her flat. There had been a burglary that had gone wrong.
Any persons walking into that crime scene would have been shocked and horrified by what they'd seen.
There was blood from the front door all the way down the passageway and all the way into the living area. It was all over the bed, it was on the walls, it was absolutely everywhere.
But the horror which confronted Joanna when she first entered their flat was nothing compared to what she discovered next.
In there, she finds Matthew on the floor.
Frantic, distraught, Joanna dialed 999. But there was nothing anyone could do. Matthew had been dead for hours. It appeared he had lost his life when a robbery had gone horribly wrong.
When police officers arrived within the scene, they very, very quickly took Joanna away to the police station. She was taken into a room and they made every effort to try and comfort her and calm her down.
While Joanna was being looked after in Nottingham, down in Suffolk, a police car arrived at the Pyke family home.
We'd just gone to bed, it was about 10:15, and there was a knock at the front door. There were 2 policemen standing there. Never had any inkling that it was to do with Matthew. And when they told us, just couldn't believe it.
When my dad first broke the news to me, I remember the exact time. It was 27 minutes past 11 at night.
They didn't have much information, just that he'd been found dead in the flat. So we had no idea what had happened, and we had to wait for about an hour before we heard from the police in Nottingham, who said that he'd been found with stab wounds, and that was all they could tell us at that time. And it was just the most awful, awful night. And, well, I would never want anybody else to go through something like that.
The Nottinghamshire forensics team began investigating Matthew and Joanna's flat. The scene immediately began to reveal what had happened to 20-year-old Matthew Pyke on the 19th of September 2008.
I think we both assumed that it was a burglary gone wrong, because I couldn't see that anybody who knew Matthew would want to hurt him.
The attack on Matthew was sustained, ferocious, frenzied. No one will be able to understand what Matthew went through, but what I do know is that he fought frantically for his life.
He wasn't the sort of person to cause anybody to do that. And the questions we were being asked just seemed... I remember thinking, this is really peculiar. They're talking as though it's somebody who knew him.
At the crime scene, the forensics team had found a crucial clue which proved Matthew did indeed know his killer.
Very close to Matthew's head was an old computer monitor that had been on the floor, and there was writing on the side of the computer adjacent to Matthew's head. It was written in blood. It was a message that was written in Matthew's blood. And very quickly it became evident that Matthew had tried to send us a message about what had happened.
With one of his last actions, Matthew had tried to identify the name of his killer.
How brave he was to call over there and to write, you know, to try and give the police some kind of clue as to what was happening. I mean, I wouldn't have thought to have done that if I was in his shoes. He was just so brave, and, you know, if it's possible, I'd love him even more for it.
But would the 2 letters written in blood be enough to ensure detectives caught Matthew's killer? On the 19th of September 2008, 21-year-old Joanna discovered the body of her 20-year-old boyfriend at the flat they shared in Nottingham. At first, everyone assumed he'd been killed during a burglary, but before he died, Matthew Pyke left detectives a vital clue.
His last efforts were to try and write the name David on the side of his computer. He never completed that. He wrote a D, he wrote an A, and then sadly he's passed away and he's not been able to write anymore, but clearly that's what he was trying to write.
And when asked by the police if she knew anyone who might wish Matthew harm, Joanna immediately gave them a name that corresponded with Matthew's dying action.
David, maybe.
It was very evident from those early conversations, having spoken with Joanne, that the only individual that would have wanted to take Matthew's life was David Heist.
Saying that he loved me and
Joanna revealed the months of problems they had endured as a result of David Heist becoming relentlessly obsessed with her. But all she knew about Heist, apart from his name and username, was that he lived somewhere in Germany. Nottinghamshire detectives had to urgently solve the mystery. They turned to Matthew and Joanna's website. They asked all the other website forum users to keep behaving online as if nothing had happened, so they didn't make Heist nervous. Meanwhile, one of the detectives quickly became a member of the forum.
I could observe what was being said and who was online, who was talking and what they were talking about. And if there was any information that was going to be important to the inquiry, how to feed that into the inquiry as quickly as possible.
And he discovered David Heist was online, talking about Matthew with other forum members.
David Heist actually introduced in a conversation with another user that, "You don't think I did it, do you? I can prove that I was at home on Friday." And the other user says to him, "Prove it." And he says, "What?" and sends a copy of a travel ticket for the Friday morning to prove that he was actually in Germany.
David Heist seemed confident he could prove his innocence. It also appeared he had been online, using the forum the day of Matthew's murder. David Heist had alibis. But they were alibis the Nottinghamshire detectives were prepared to test. They started with the airports to see whether Heist had entered the UK around the time of Matthew's murder.
We knew that Heist had travelled before, and sure enough, we found him on a passenger mandate from flights in and out of Frankfurt into Birmingham. As a result of that, I was dispatched down to Birmingham Airport to try and locate Heist on the CCTV footage from within the airport.
The CCTV footage from Birmingham Airport clearly showed David Heist boarding a plane to Frankfurt 4 hours after Matthew's murder on the 19th of September 2008. His alibis were lies. Heist had secretly travelled to the UK.
That was a eureka moment. It's the first time we had a physical description of what Heist was wearing, and also it gave me an idea of who to look for on the inbound footage. We could then use that information to properly analyse the Nottingham CCTV, and hopefully we'd find him at our scene.
Detectives were able to find CCTV footage revealing Heist's journey from the airport all the way to Matthew and Joanna's address the night before the attack. They were also able to track his return journey the morning of the brutal murder. David Heist was at the murder scene, but he remained a complete mystery. All the detectives knew was that he lived somewhere in Germany. The race was on to arrest him. Detectives turned to the members of the website forum asking for any information about the elusive Heist known as Eagle the Lightning.
But it told us about the accident on the 1st of August on the M11 in Cambridge.
And we were aware that after the crash that a person had been taken to the hospital. We managed to ascertain some details and an address in Germany for our main suspect.
Less than 5 days after the murder, Nottinghamshire police had tracked David Heist down. On the 24th of September 2008, he was arrested at home by the German police. Detectives called the Pyke family to tell them the news.
We had a phone call to say that they'd got a suspect, but that was the first time I heard his name. Didn't know anything about him up until then.
David Heist was in custody and the Nottinghamshire detective team travelled to Germany to question him. And when Heist was interviewed, he confessed.
Heist admitted that he'd been to Nottingham and they'd stabbed Matthew Pyke.
But he claimed he only did so in self-defence. David Heist was confessing to manslaughter, not premeditated murder.
He didn't actually want to admit a murder because that first account only indicated that he had gone there to hurt Matthew and to punch him, and that a fight had ensued, and that the knife he had with him he used to defend himself, and that he had stabbed Matthew in order to protect himself from what Matthew was going to do to him.
Detectives needed concrete evidence to charge and convict Heist of premeditated murder. They searched his house and recovered the blood-soaked jacket he had worn when he killed Matthew. And in the pocket was a critical clue which proved Heist had carefully planned Matthew's murder. It was a suicide note, supposedly written by Matthew, but in fact detectives were able to prove it had been created on Heist's computer in Germany 2 days before the murder. David Heist had clearly planned Matthew's murder and intended to make it look like suicide.
On the 17th of September, we know that he generated a suicide note that was written on behalf of Matthew, intending to leave it in the flat as if Matthew had taken his own life.
But Heist's psychotic hatred of Matthew meant the fake suicide plan was destined to fail.
The attack had been so brutal that there was no way that anybody would consider that Matthew had taken his own life.
It was very evident that Matthew Pyke fought for his life, struggled incessantly inside the flat, and Heist had a clear realisation that anybody that would have walked in there would have known that that wasn't somebody that took his own life. So he then decided to make it look like a burglary. He travelled to the UK with one thing on his mind, and that was to kill Matthew Pyke.
David Heist was extradited to the UK to await trial. While the case was being prepared for court, the Pyke family had to deal with their grief at losing Matthew.
Christmas was horrible. We didn't really want to celebrate it. We didn't want to do anything, but we've got grandchildren and we've still got Adam to consider. So we did the best we could and we got through it. You know, it's one in a long line of first occasions that we had to go through, and you just do it because you have to.
On the 27th of April 2009, David Heist stood trial for the murder of Matthew Pyke.
I knew it was going to be upsetting, but I hadn't realised that I would be so upset right from the first day as I was. That was where the pathologist was talking about and what Matthew would have been doing at particular times, and it was when he said that Matthew was in the fetal position, and that upset me.
During the trial, the detective team presented their case to the jury. David Heist had booked his plane tickets from Frankfurt to Birmingham over a week before flying and had asked his sister in Germany to log on to the website for him in his name whilst he was out of the country, to create an alibi. Heist travelled to Nottingham on the 18th of September 2008 and waited outside Matthew and Joanna's flat overnight. He watched Joanna go to work at 7:30 a.m. on the morning of the 19th of September. Half an hour later, he went to the couple's apartment and knocked on the door. When Matthew opened the door, Heist immediately began his attack, viciously stabbing Matthew for the first time at the doorway to his flat. He then stabbed him a further 85 times. Heist had arrived with the fake suicide note ready in his pocket, but realised the murder was so violent, so brutal, that no one would believe Matthew had killed himself. Heist decided instead to make it appear the flat had been burgled. As Matthew lay dying, he created a vital clue for detectives by writing the letters D and A in his own blood. Meanwhile, Heist washed himself, changed into the spare clothes he had brought with him, and left the apartment, carrying his blooded clothes back to Germany. He had been in the UK just 16 hours. On the 11th of May 2009, the jury found David Heist guilty of the murder of Matthew Pyke at Nottingham Crown Court. He was sentenced to life imprisonment.
I was overjoyed that he was found guilty and, you know, he's been put away, but no sentence to ever bring Matthew back.
I was relieved, but then I started to feel sorry for him because this was going to wreck his life as well. And I know that sounds ridiculous because he'd murdered my son, but I think it's part of being a mother.
The tragic 21st century crime that robbed Joanna of her loving boyfriend and Matthew's family of their beloved son, brother and uncle could clearly happen to anyone, anywhere.
People gain a great deal of confidence when they're on the computer within their own homes. They dish out information and form friendships with people that they don't actually really know. It's a very, very dangerous practice, and people should think very long and hard before they disclose their personal information on the computer.
Following the trial, Joanna has begun trying to rebuild her life.
We're still in touch with Joanna. She's actually become godmother to one of Adam's children, and she's going to go back to university soon. She's trying to rebuild her life. She'll never forget Matthew, but she's got to carry on.
Matthew Pyke will never be forgotten. After his death, the website he created with Joanna was flooded with tributes to Matthew, celebrating his life and talent.
I knew nothing about the website that he was involved in until after he died, and people told me then, and I wish he had, because I was so proud and so impressed.
This is a story of survival.
I was 14. I was a schoolgirl by day and a sex slave at night.
A girl forced to spend her childhood in a satanic sex cult in Wales, sexually abused by its leader and her own mother, and forced to sleep with 1,800 men.
By telling Annabelle there's no such thing as family, actually it's telling her there is no one out there to protect you.
It's possible to take a child and make them believe the most outrageous things are normal.
And it's a story of courage, a girl who broke ranks to expose the deviant world which imprisoned her.
The police investigation was difficult. They were trying to penetrate a very tightly knit group.
Why was my mum calling me a liar when she knew that was what happened? I wasn't dreaming this.
The identity of the girl at the centre of this story is protected by court order. Her name and the names of other victims and her family have been changed. Her part is played by an actress. We'll call her Annabelle Forrest, the pseudonym she used in a book telling her story. Katie White's was her ghostwriter.
It was difficult for Annabelle to tell her story, just to me, alone in a room. But I think she wanted to, and there were things that she'd never told anybody before. It's not something she talks about. So for her, I think the process was quite cathartic, quite healing.
Annabelle's story starts in London's East End, where she lived with her mother and younger half-sister.
My parents split up when I was 2, and the man of the house was my mum's partner, Alan. He was the dad of my half-sister, Olivia. I did know my own dad. He was affectionate with me and I liked him. But it was Alan that dropped me off and picked me up from school.
Have you had a good day?
Yeah, I've had a good day.
Yeah, fantastic, come on.
He was more of a parent than my mum, Jackie. don't remember ever having a cuddle from my mum or her reading me a story at night. I don't remember much about her at all.
Like many others in the block of flats that was home, Annabelle's mum, Jackie, was on benefits, though she'd worked for a time as a dental nurse.
One thing I do remember about my mum was she had this shark tattooed on her shoulder. And that's what she was like, gliding through my childhood. It wasn't that I was short on love. I had Alan and my dad and my mum's sisters and my grandparents, and they were all lovely.
She did have an extended family. However, the one person that really she craved love, attention and affection from was actually her mother, Jackie. And this was singularly missing. With children who are deprived of that, there's a vulnerability that makes them very susceptible to being groomed in the presence of any affection or attention that they might be given.
Whilst Annabelle was still small, a new figure entered Jackie's life.
Annabelle wouldn't have been able to realise it, but her mother, Jackie, was getting closer and closely involved with this man, Colin Batley.
A man who, it would later emerge, had been a sexual abuser from the age of 12. Colin from Shoreditch was obsessed with the occult. He'd been living off prostitution, gambling and black marketeering. Now he was drawing together women like Jackie to found a cult based on the writings of the 19th century Satanist, Aleister Crowley.
He seemed to believe what was written by him about the occult, about Satanism, about black magic, sex as well, but almost as a tool of power, if you like.
For Colin, this idea of the cult was an incredibly important thing because this was the tool that he was able to use to draw people in.
Several of the women, like Jackie, had children.
There was a very clear paedophilic strategy of grooming in choosing victims very carefully.
How did a perfectly normal and strong woman become so easily led into Colin's world? I think that Colin had a certain aura to make people believe that there was more to it, that he really did have access to a higher realm, a secret to, eternal life.
By 1997, his church had 17 members. Colin persuaded several to move with him to Kidwelly in South Wales, bringing their children.
In that area, there's something like 900 square miles of basically nothing. And people can vanish if they choose to do so. There are all sorts of alternative lifestyles underway down there. Tucked away, no one can see them, no one knows what's happening.
I hated it there. The house where we was living was rotten. It's like an old man's house. It's freezing.
Hello? I've told you I can't talk to you.
Is that my dad?
Nope.
Nobody came to see us, so I missed my aunts and my grandparents. Alan came with us, but it was obvious Mum didn't want him then.
Oi, Annabelle, come on. Come on, we're going to be late.
On, off you go.
She made him get work away, and gradually he stopped coming back.
Many sexual abusers isolate their victims from an extended family community network. In doing that, their power is increased because they become all-powerful.
It was several weeks before Annabelle, aged 7, first met Colin.
Wake up, wake up. Downstairs now.
It was the middle of the night.
You know your family's come here to be part of something very special.
I was scared. The way you looked.
This is where your life in the church begins. This is going to be a difficult path for you, your mum and your sister.
I didn't know what he was going on about. I was 7. I'd just woken up.
Only you can find your way to the palace to avoid the eternal pain of the abyss.
At some point he made a gesture towards Jackie, who pulled the tracksuit waistband down over him and started to give him a blowjob right in front of Annabelle.
The evening in which Annabelle meets Colin Batley for the first time, he demonstrates the power and the control he has over her mother. This will have been engraved on Annabelle's mind, the power he had over all the church members, including her.
Come forth, Annabelle. You're the chosen one. Come on, come forth.
He lunged forward and hooked an arm behind my knees and pulled me forward so I could see what was happening.
When your period starts, I'll have you.
I didn't even know what a period was. I didn't understand any of it.
You can go to bed now.
Colin Batley had just become the dominant figure in Annabelle's life. She was about to find out what it meant to be female and a child in his world. Annabelle Forrest, aged 7, uprooted from her extended family in London, had been compelled to watch her mother perform a sex act on Colin Batley, the leader of a satanic cult he'd moved to Wales.
Mum wasn't working, but she seemed to have no time for anything apart from Colin. I was lonely and miserable.
Annabelle started at a local primary school, but soon decided she'd had enough of her new life.
Where are you going?
To live with my dad.
OK, I'll arrange it.
I was surprised by her reaction. I'd expected a fight.
Why do you want to go to your dad's?
Just to.
Fine. It's your choice. I'll take you there right this minute if you like. But you do know he won't look after you like your mum. Won't feed you, wash your clothes. But if that's what you want, we'll go right now.
I did want to go, but there was something in the way Colin spoke that made me doubt my feelings.
I'll stay here.
Good girl. That's your choice. And a good choice.
He always made it seem like it was your decision, and it wasn't.
After a year in Wales, Annabelle, her sister and mother moved to a cul-de-sac in Kidwelly, right next door to Colin and close to other cult members.
At first, everything seemed normal. Colin had a family of his own, including a daughter called Hope, who immediately became my friend. His wife Elaine was nice too. But of course everything wasn't normal, because our lives now were run by the church.
I am alone. There is no God where I am.
Members of Colin's cult gathered every Sunday.
Help me, O warrior lord of Thebes.
There were readings from Satanist Aleister Crowley's Book of the Law, with its references to Egyptology.
Crowley claimed to have written the book after the words were dictated to him by a god.
The chosen priest is the prince priest, the beast, and in his woman, called the Scarlet Woman, is all power given.
An essential part of the book is that man must do what he wants to do, irrespective of any laws.
Drawing on the writings of Aleister Crowley, Colin was able to make people question the boundaries around behaviour within the family and sexual propriety, and having those barriers taken down and stripped away, he took away all semblance of what we would consider to be normality.
Let all chaste women be despised. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
I think the Egyptian iconography was quite powerful because of the nature of the symbols that were used. They were quite frightening, especially for young children to see, and that was part of the culture of fear that he was able to build up for the people around him.
Oh, I'm going upstairs to do my meds. Watch your sister and don't come in.
Every day, Mum went upstairs for an hour to do her meditation. It was only by accident I found out what that actually meant. That's when I saw her tattoos.
All female members of the sect had a tattoo known as the Eye of Horus, which is known as the all-seeing eye. It's supposed to be a protective mechanism. It means that it can see everything, and Batley can see them, and in so doing he can control them and protect them.
The church had loads of rules. You couldn't turn your back on the Egyptian gods or play with non-church kids or go to the park or the shops. No internet, no news, no cinema or restaurant, no alcohol for the adults. And if anyone asked, we was to say we was Mormons.
Colin would often refer to the rules of the church, and whenever he was challenged on these, he would then refer to something known as church secrecy. That's within church secrecy. I can't expand on those things.
Batley was able to maintain that his cult was part of a far larger church that even had headquarters in France, that there's some very powerful people involved who could cause harm if they wished, and that it would be better for them if they did what he said.
Colin was the Prince Priest.
Are you looking into my eyes? I warned you about staring into my eyes. You'll be looking into the abyss.
Sometimes I'd forget his rules. He could be terrifying.
Can you see the devil? He can see you.
My mum had to give him all our benefits and he gave her just £50 a fortnight for food. If anyone answered him back, he'd get angry. I never actually saw him hit anyone, but you could never tell.
The cult's activities all took place behind closed doors.
It seemed that in the whole time that Annabelle was growing up, there was only perhaps one occasion where somebody noticed that anything was amiss in her life, and that was a teacher who bought her food sometimes. But the rest of the time, perhaps because there was a lot of poverty in the area, it seemed that her problems went unnoticed.
When I was 11, the test started. I didn't know they were tests at first. It was a hot day. The heat makes me feel ill.
What are you doing inside on a nice day like this?
He smelled horrible. Of old sweat and tobacco. He was minging. He put his hands on my shoulders and pinned me down. He pulled down the waistband of his tracksuit. I was 11 years old. I didn't know what was happening to me. He put it in me. And it hurt. It really hurt.
Told you I'd have you.
He didn't say not to tell anyone. He didn't have to. Who could I talk to? I couldn't talk to my mum. I couldn't talk to Elaine. It was her husband. Colin would have found out. He spoke to the gods and they told him everything. From that moment, I changed as a person. I felt very alone.
It happened again the next night.
You do know the gods are pleased with you.
One of the things that Annabelle would have craved, with the lack of affection and attention from Mother, was to feel special. We have to remember her father was not present in her life.
But you have to pass tests to go higher in the church and prove yourself fully to them.
Yes.
Is this your will, that you should do the tests?
Yes.
He very cleverly didn't say you must do this. He gave this to her in a semblance of choice. So for her, at that time, it wasn't an act of abuse. It was an act of choice in order to become a fully fledged member of the church.
After that, it was like that every night. My mum must have known, but she did nothing.
In fact, when Annabelle was 14, Colin revealed her mother would play an active role in Annabelle's progress through the church.
It's time for you to learn the ways of the Scarlet Woman. The wife of the Prince Priest.
Then he said, there's no such thing as family. I was about to discover what he meant.
Colin's coming around tonight after school. He wants to see both of us together. Got it?
Jackie came under Batley's spell completely, even to the point of viewing her own daughter as somebody who Colin Batley could abuse whenever he wanted to, as if her own daughter was there, not for her, but for Colin Batley.
When Colin arrived, she started to have sex with him, and I had to join in. I felt numb. I mean, you're not supposed to have sex with your own mum.
He's asking them to break one of the last and few taboos, which is sexual activity between mothers and daughters and mothers and their children. And in breaking that taboo is actually a way of breaking the person's will.
Sex sessions were now happening every other night, but it was about to get worse.
You're too uptight. Tonight, before Colin comes round, he wants us to have sex together.
I knew I had no choice. It was horrible. It took me to a place inside myself I didn't even know existed. When Colin came in, he said, did I enjoy it? I was too scared to say no.
Well, Jackie would know that this is unacceptable behaviour, this is criminal behaviour, it's highly abusive, but she would justify it to herself in terms of her serving Colin's needs.
Soon, Colin told her she also had to sleep with a 19-year-old boy from the church called Thomas, who was 5 years older than Annabelle.
What this would mean is, should Annabelle fall pregnant, which was always a risk because he was not using protection, it could always be explained away as being Thomas's child.
I didn't want to, but Colin made me. He got a lot of pleasure from making me do things I didn't want to. So now I was having sex with Colin, Mum and Colin, and Thomas. I was a schoolgirl by day and a sex slave at night.
As the years went by, Batley had access to more and more young people whom he abused. He used the young people as ways of gaining access to other young people until there was another subgroup within the cult, at least 3 young girls and 1 young boy.
He started sending Elaine and Hope to Tenby for the weekend so he could do what he wanted without Elaine finding out. And whilst they was away, we all had to wear teeny skirts and makeup like Cleopatra. He said it was the way of the Scarlet Woman.
Whilst Annabelle was still 14, Jackie became pregnant.
I knew it was Colin's. I was there when they had sex without a condom. There was a rumour that it was my mum's former partner, Alan's, but we hadn't seen him for years, so that was rubbish. Probably made up by Colin so that Elaine didn't find out that he was the dad. I was so pleased when the baby was born. Mum seemed transformed. But then I realised that all the love was for the baby and not for me.
When we look at Jackie's behaviour around her baby, it was very different to the behaviour that she showed towards Annabelle as a child, largely because the father was Colin, this man who had become a demigod for her.
As the years passed, Annabelle became increasingly worn down. She was left looking after the baby because Jackie disappeared at weekends, doing unexplained work for the church, after which Jackie was too exhausted to cope. Aged 17, Annabelle was forced to have sex with a church member her own age with learning difficulties.
Many sexual abusers will try to entice the child to engage in activities of which they are ashamed. In having to perform that act under his direction, in her mind might have made her feel that she was no better than what was being done to her.
I got very depressed. I didn't want to be having sex with anyone, especially not my own mother, which was still going on. I took an overdose of paracetamols and went to bed. I felt dead anyway. Emotionally and physically dead.
What are you doing?
I'm going to bed.
Why so early?
I'm tired. Next day, unfortunately, I woke up. I just felt a bit sick.
We know you took the tablets. It ain't gonna work. You're protected by the gods.
Now I knew he was all-powerful. He knew everything. I already knew running away was pointless. I couldn't survive without the church and the rules. Now, I realised I couldn't even escape by killing myself.
But Colin Batley was about to sow the seeds of his own destruction. A force more powerful even than him was about to shake his world. By 2007, Annabelle Forrest had spent a decade in the secretive pseudo-religious sex cult run by Colin Batley in South Wales. He'd been abusing her since she was 11. She was now 17.
I'd been feeling really unwell for a few weeks and my periods went all funny. And one day someone said I could be pregnant. I said, no way. I mean, Colin said I couldn't get pregnant, that I was protected by the gods. It was the first time I'd cried in years. I didn't want a baby. I mean, how could I bring up a baby in this life?
Her fear would have been that in bringing this child into the world, especially if it was a daughter, is that she would become a future victim for Colin Batley.
But the unborn baby was about to expose for the first time a chink in Colin Batley's armour.
Colin?
Yeah.
I'm having a baby.
Yeah. We already knew that.
But in that moment, when he reacted, I knew it was a surprise. In that split second, I started to doubt him. He couldn't be all-powerful because he didn't know.
You want to keep your legs crossed a bit.
We think you should get rid of it.
I want to get rid of it as well. I absolutely didn't want a child. And I knew it was his. It wasn't Thomas's. I always used a condom with Thomas.
But that night, Colin unexpectedly changed his mind.
Suddenly he was angry. He said I'd have to have the baby. If I got rid of it, I'd be murdering a child of the gods.
A strategic decision to keep the child. It would reduce the chances of her wanting to escape and the risk of disclosure or her going to the police.
Look, this is your path. If you want to get rid of it, we'll sort it tomorrow. But it's totally against the gods' wishes.
Colin forced Annabelle to tell Thomas she was pregnant and that the baby was his.
I didn't think that would happen.
Neither did I.
I'm happy, though.
Are you?
Yeah.
It was all such awful lies. Colin knew the baby was his. From then on, I was like a zombie. I felt nothing for the child I was carrying.
Colin's demands for sex intensified.
I can see the baby inside you, you know. It feeds me. It makes me stronger.
I got more and more depressed. When I took the knife, I didn't really know why I was doing it. I went to the bathroom and cut myself. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't care. I felt something. For the first time in months, I'd broken through the numbness.
Many survivors, in trying to suppress the feelings of pain and hurt from the sexual abuse, often dissociate and are not able to feel anything. And one way that they are able to feel is by self-harming, by cutting themselves.
After a scan told Annabelle the baby was a girl, she harmed herself again.
I just knew I couldn't keep a girl safe from Colin. I thought the only way was to kill myself and the baby inside me. So I used the knife again, deeper. Blood came out immediately. And in that instant, I knew I didn't want to die. I had to stop the bleeding. Afterwards, I felt so bad. I'd been about to kill my own baby. But Colin never said anything. And I wondered again, did he really know everything?
In February 2008, baby Emily was born.
From the second she arrived, I completely changed. I forgot where I was. It was just her and me. It was magical.
When Annabelle described Emily's birth and seeing her for the first time, she suddenly smiled and Annabelle laughed. And it was the first time I'd ever heard her laugh.
I just felt. Emily took away the stone from my heart.
You have no idea what I've been through for you.
Having Emily strengthened Annabelle's resentment against Colin.
Give her to me. I said give her to me.
I didn't want anyone to touch her, especially not Colin. He didn't change at all. I'd been given a £500 grant to get stuff for her, and he took that. He made me give him a blowjob so I could get money for nappies.
Colin forced Thomas to move in with Annabelle and Emily, but continued having sex with her himself. 3 months after the birth, he made an announcement.
He said it was time I started working for the church. This is when I got an inkling of what my mum and the other women had been doing, disappearing every weekend.
Are you ready to be set on the path to the palace?
Yes.
Then there's 3 things you can do. You can work in porn, run a sex shop, or become the whore of Babylon, which I believe is your destiny, to become a Scarlet Woman. Is this your choice?
Try this one.
But I still didn't properly understand what was involved, even when my mum took me shopping for lingerie.
Today's the day, my little whore of Babylon. You're off to Bristol.
I never even heard of Bristol, but I knew this was about whatever my work was to be for the church. They'll look after Emily.
Me, of course. It's only a couple of days.
Colin had no sense of others' needs. He only cared about himself. I knew he wouldn't have a clue how to make a bottle or change Emily.
Annabelle was taken to a building called the Paradise Lounge. A cult member called Shelley let her in.
In there.
Annabelle discovered her mum, Jackie, was already there.
OK, so your name's Camilla. You introduce yourself as Camilla. If a bloke comes in and you get picked, it's 60 quid for half an hour.
I was totally shocked. Not for 1 second had I imagined I'd be having sex with strangers for money.
Colin had really excelled himself, I think, when he came up with this wheeze to get all the girls to go and prostitute themselves to get money for him, and he made them believe that that was part of their spiritual quest.
Colin Batley already possessed Jackie's body and soul. He already possessed Annabelle's body and soul. And proof of that was to enslave them into prostitution. So they now became merely a commodity.
I'd had sex before, but I was petrified. I didn't feel nothing at all. I just felt worthless. But at the same time, for the first time, I was told I was good looking. I had a nice body. That first night, I had 8 clients.
The trips to Bristol became routine. Every Friday for 3 nights, on duty 24 hours a day.
It was divide and rule. So he set all the girls up in competition with each other. And so he said, oh, you're all in competition to become the Scarlet Woman, the chosen one. And therefore they weren't really encouraged to talk amongst themselves. There was a lot of backstabbing, there was a lot of jealousy, there was a lot of hatred among them because that made Colin even more powerful. They fought for his affections just as he wanted them to.
I was exhausted. The thing was, I got picked a lot. Colin said we had to sleep with 318, 618 and 918 men, because those were the sacred numbers laid down by the Book of the Law to prove ourselves worthy of becoming the whore of Babylon.
Colin would ask women to send him a text message every time they engaged in a particular sexual act with a client at the brothel, and to add a particular number of kisses if they'd given those clients extras. So he was able to keep an audit trail of absolutely everything that had gone on.
He took all Annabelle's earnings, £2,000 to £3,000 each weekend.
He said the money was going to the church HQ in France, but he was buying new TVs, furniture, cars, holidays. I just didn't believe him. I'd look at his stuff and think, I've bought that by having sex with strangers.
Really, it's about humiliation. He wanted to humiliate her in that and show her how powerful he was.
Annabelle's target was 1,854 men. She soon exceeded 1,800.
Her mother had actually gone past that figure and had actually not benefited from it at all.
That year has affected me more than anything else. Being made to do that, sleep with all them men, leave my daughter, her face every time I left her.
She got angrier and angrier as she was taken further away from her own daughter. She wasn't able to see her take her first steps or hear her first words, and she was being denied the chance to be a mother.
The worst time was when I had to join Mum and one of her regular clients, and she gave me oral sex again. That was a turning point. It killed me. After that, I couldn't do it no more. I knew I had to get out and get Emily out.
Annabelle began keeping money back, building an escape fund.
At first, it was just £30 or £40 from an extra I didn't tell Colin about. I mean, it wasn't really stealing, I'd earned it. But I was scared Colin would know. But he didn't.
In May 2009, Annabelle decided to escape. But to do so, she needed help.
We can do it. We can get away from the church. Be together as a family.
That's exactly what I want.
Thomas knew nothing of her brothel work, but he too had been forced to hand his wages to Colin.
Find Alan, my mum's old boyfriend.
Yeah, I remember.
Go to the library. They've got the internet.
I'll sort it.
Alan was easy to trace on Facebook. Immediately, he agreed to help.
Thomas was going to join us later. Colin lived next door and I was petrified he was going to wake and catch me.
What?
Hello, babe, you all right? What's going on?
Oh, can we just go?
Right.
No, it's fine, it's fine.
Okay, babe, come on, you just get in, yeah?
Annabelle had fled physically, but the fear of Colin Batley would not be so easy to escape. New dangers and new darkness lay ahead.
On your back?
Yeah.
She's dancing on your back.
Good morning, cup of tea?
It was Annabelle and Emily's first day of freedom.
I didn't know what he meant. Did he want me to go and make him a tea? Then I realised he was offering to make me one. The first time ever.
They'd escaped from Colin Batley's sex cult in Kidwelly and were staying with their rescuer, Alan, in Carmarthen. Thomas, who'd lived with Annabelle in Kidwelly, joined them.
He said Colin made out like he didn't care I'd gone. Mum didn't say anything at all. There were problems from the start with Thomas. I couldn't face having sex anymore, and he became really controlling, started acting funny.
What are you doing?
Nothing. What are you doing?
I don't believe this. Just go away and stop following me. It's creepy.
I thought he might be back in touch with Colin. He kept saying we should go back for a visit. I kicked him out. he went straight back to Kidwelly.
Her Aunt Kate still lived in London, and Annabelle went to stay with her. Finally, nearly a year after her escape from the cult, Annabelle felt ready to open up about her life.
Colin was abusing you when you were 11. Abusing me?
I'd never thought about it like this. Colin had always asked me if I wanted to do the test, so I assumed it was my choice.
You're a child. A child can't choose to have sex.
No, it's my choice.
It was rape. You've got to go to the police. You can't let him get away with it.
That was when I went off the rails. Knowing Emily was a product of rape, I couldn't cope.
Annabelle started going out by herself.
I'd spent so long on a leash, I finally decided to do what the hell I liked.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I met a small-time drug dealer.
Already over the limit.
Every weekend we'd meet up for marathon sex and drug sessions.
Annabelle was suddenly confronted with the fact that she had been raped all her life and her child was the product of rape. So she went out, she drank and she took drugs just to seek oblivion.
One of the things that many survivors do when they're in a place of safety is to self-medicate. And one way of doing that is using drugs and alcohol. In addition, they want to prove to themselves that their sexuality hasn't been compromised by the sexual abuse in childhood. So they engage in sexual activity almost to the point of promiscuity.
I started to neglect Emily. I was always on a come down, depressed, dirty, ashamed of myself. Then Kate found my stash of coke.
You bring this filth here, into my house, after all we've done for you.
It's nothing.
Get out.
What?
You're on your own.
No.
And you will be on your own, because you'll lose Emily. They'll put her in care.
That really woke me up. I stopped that stuff overnight.
But still, Annabelle didn't quite have the impetus needed to make her go to the police.
After a few days away, my Aunt Kate agreed to take me back.
God, you are painfully thin. Have you been for a checkup?
I knew what was on her mind. All that time in the brothel. 1,800 men. Had I caught something sinister?
A week later, Annabelle went for an HIV test.
How many people would you say you've slept with?
Multiple. A lot.
More than 20?
Yeah.
And did you always use barrier contraception?
No. Waiting for the result was the longest half hour of my life.
Relax. It's negative.
Thanks.
Are you okay? You know, you have been very lucky. You are in the high-risk category.
That did it. It finally brought it home to me. What about all the others still left in Kidwelly?
I'm fine. Yeah, it was all clear. But I want you to do me a favour. I want you to take me to the police station. No, I want to go now.
Annabelle's police interview, videoed for use in court, took 3 days.
It was frightening. The interviews were going on, and it was getting bigger and bigger. I don't really understand what he's done.
Well, there's rape, indecent assault, causing a child to have sex, causing prostitution for personal gain, multiple offences of each.
Bob Arthur's news agency covered the case.
The police investigation was difficult. They were trying to penetrate a very tightly knit group who didn't want to get themselves into trouble, but also were willing to stand by each other and not get other members of the group in trouble. The material relating to Egyptology was found, Aleister Crowley's book was found, but they aren't illegal. But once other victims came forward, and that was the beginning of the end.
Colin and Jackie, Annabelle's mum, were arrested, and despite everything, Annabelle was racked with guilt.
I was scared. What had I done? My mum was still my mum, and Colin had been the most important person in my life. And my sister and half-brother had been taken into care.
But then Annabelle learned Colin and Jackie were persistently denying the charges.
That made me furious. Why was my mum calling me a liar when she knew that was what happened? I wasn't dreaming this. They offered me counselling, but I wasn't ready. I was angry. I wanted justice.
The police were very short of forensic evidence, but they achieved a breakthrough when it's possible to prove by DNA that Annabelle's child had been fathered by Colin Batley himself, despite what he might want to say.
The trial at Swansea Crown Court opened in February 2011 and lasted 5 weeks. Colin Batley was found guilty of 35 offences. Jackie Marling, Annabelle's mother, and Elaine, Colin's wife, were found guilty of 5. Shelley Miller, who oversaw the prostitution, was convicted of 2.
I went to the sentencing because I wanted to see my mum one last time.
She wanted her mother to reach out to her in some way, to say sorry, to acknowledge the damage she'd done, the pain she'd caused.
Look who's here.
That was it. That killed the last emotion I had for my mum. There was no remorse. I knew then I had no mother.
Colin was jailed for a minimum of 11 years and told he may never be released. Jackie was jailed for 12 years, Elaine for 8, Shelley for 5.
It's been a long while since I've seen a woman get 12 years down Swansea Crown Court. I mean, these people were serious participants, as well as what they might be able to describe as victims. At any point, they could have gone to the authorities, to the police, but they chose not to. And the jail sentences they eventually received reflect their roles in what was going on.
Annabelle has met a lovely man who is very kind and very loving, and they have had a little boy together. So now they live in a different part of the country, and Annabelle is very happy and settled and trying to get on with her new life.
The hardest thing has been trying to get Colin out of my head. For so long he's been my preacher, abuser, leader, boss, everything. He even sneaks into my dreams sometimes. But I'm trying really hard to build a good life for myself and my children. They took my childhood, but they won't ruin my future. I won. In the end, I won.